let's talk about stylistic choices. So, stylistic choices, like we said, are those things that happen with the language at the sentence level. I like to think of stylistic choices as microscopic, like I can zero in on them in a text. And at times they can happen by chance, but sometimes they are intentional. So, stylistic choices can be a really great place to look for analysis, for rhetorical analysis. The first one we're going to talk about is syntax, which is sentence variation and structure. So when we're analyzing syntax, what we're trying to do is find patterns in the way sentences are put together and kind of attributing that to the author's overall purpose. So what I have listed here are different types of sentences, different ways of talking about syntax. Some of them are familiar, some of them are probably not. But if we are going to analyze the use of syntax and sentence structure in a text, we need to be able to talk about it or know the words that can kind of fit that description. So let's go through them. I will go quickly through some of them that you are hopefully familiar with, and I'll explain others more. So let's start with parallel. Parallel structure means that the sentence structure between a few consecutive sentences, so that means next to each other, have a similar structure. That can mean similar length. It can mean the subject-verb structure is the same. It can mean they have a similar punctuation pattern. But as you read them, they read the same, they sound the same, and they have that same structure as it's read aloud or on the page. The next four are types of sentences: declarative statements, interrogative questions, exclamatory or exclamations or interjections, and imperative sentences are commands. All can fit different purposes, and most texts use a combination of many of those. The next four are the basic grammatical structures of sentences. So simple sentences means it has a subject-verb. I ran to the store is a simple sentence. Whereas a compound sentence combines two independent clauses. If you can't remember, an independent clause has a subject and verb, and it can stand alone. So a compound sentence takes two of those, combines them with a conjunction. Or a semicolon would also achieve the same. The next one is a complex sentence. A complex sentence combines a phrase and a independent clause. A phrase is just a grouping of words that doesn't stand alone as a sentence. It probably has a verb or a subject, not necessarily both. And then a compound complex sentence is a combination of the last two. Hopefully review. But what I want to talk about more so is rhythm and fluency, because when we're talking about rhetorical analysis of syntax, we're more so looking for these things. While an author might be using simple sentences or imperative sentences to be commanding and straightforward, usually their rhythm and fluency kind of capture their tone, the mood, the expression they're trying to make. So when we're talking about rhythm, we are talking about the pace of the writing. So if we have someone who's using a lot of short, simple, imperative statements, that rhythm is going to be very staccato and broken up, but it can also be a very fast rhythm, right? Whereas if someone is using a lot of compound complex sentences with more of that declarative feel, we're going to get a slower rhythm to it, because there aren't as many punctuation breaks as we move through it. So that's one way to talk about syntax, is in terms of that rhythm and the pace. Another way to talk about syntax is to talk about the fluency. Now, fluency is kind of, I like to think about it as the connectedness of the language. So if something is very fluent, or the fluency has, I guess, what I would call like a melodic or trying to think of a more appropriate word, but a more softer fluency or a smoother fluency, that means it's going to probably have a lot of those compound complex sentences, and it's really going to flow together nicely. Whereas if something is more broken up or disconnected, that sort of fluency is going to have a different effect. So when we're talking about syntax, you're probably going to zero in on that idea of rhythm and fluency. But these other terms are here to help you kind of describe what is happening in terms of the in terms of the stylistic choice. The next category for stylistic choices is diction. Diction, put very simply, is word choice. However, if we are going to analyze the word choice in a text, we can't just say, oh, the author uses diction. All we've said is that the author uses words. So we kind of need that descriptor out in front of it to talk about diction. And what I have on the screen are 5 different types of diction, but you are not limited to those, because we can also describe diction in terms of the emotion or the tone that it evokes. So I can say something has sentimental diction. I can say it has patriotic diction. I can say it has abrasive diction, right? I can just put an adjective out in front of diction to describe what's happening. But these 5 below are different terms, or I guess categories more so, of diction that you can also refer to. And the first is formal diction, so sophisticated academic language. In this context, you'd be analyzing why is the author choosing to use that? Why are they making the stylistic choice to rely on that sophisticated, elevated language? Are they speaking to an intelligent audience? Are they trying to make themselves sound smarter than they are? That would be an analysis of formal diction. Colloquial diction is kind of ordinary or familiar language, so that would be more conversational, meaning that it's not very lofty and above your head. It's just trying to have a casual conversation. Again, you could talk about how an author wants to create common ground with their audience. Then they're probably not going to use formal language that's above their head. They're probably going to rely on that conversational colloquial diction. Dialect diction is that which applies to a specific region or culture. And that doesn't mean that they're using a word in a different language. That's an entirely different choice. That's more so if it's referring to like spelling, for example. They might be spelling something different so that when it's read or when it's spoken, it has the same feel as it would sound in dialect of a certain region or culture. Next is slang. You're familiar with that. That is very informal language, typically restricted to a particular context or group of people. So like generational slang, Gen Z slang is different than my millennial slang. And then the last one is weighted diction. So that's talking about any really emotionally charged language that a text uses. That's the type of language that's kind of intentionally trying to make you feel sad, mad, angry, whatever it is. But it's intentional word choice to evoke one of those strong emotions. The third category of stylistic choices is devices. So literary devices or figurative language. You've been hearing about them for years in English. And the list I have on the screen are some common ones that appear more frequently, I think, in passages that we see in our test or in our class. So I'm going to go through them, kind of breeze through some of the more familiar ones, but give you a quick overview. The first thing is alliteration. That is the repetition of that first consonant sound. So Sally sells seashells. Anaphora is also a form of repetition, but anaphora repeats its multiple sentences, again, consecutive. Multiple sentences that repeat the same few words at the beginning would be an example of anaphora. Apostrophe, the best way to think about that is to think of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, because apostrophe is when a writer is speaking to something abstract in Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The singer or the voice is speaking to a star, which is not a human quality that can have a conversation. So apostrophe is that speaking to an abstract or non-human entity. A euphemism is when you kind of replace a vulgar or off-putting word with something less upsetting. So a great example is instead of saying somebody died, which can come across as abrasive, they say someone has passed away, and that's a really common euphemism. Hyperbole is an exaggeration. Irony is the situation in which something happens that is the opposite of what was expected, or that difference between the expected reality and the outcome. Jargon is terminology used by a specific group. I know we talked about that kind of with slang, but jargon is more in terms of professions. So someone can use medical jargon, someone can use legal jargon, I can use educational jargon. It's just terminology that I would know within my field. And as a reader, we need to recognize when a writer is using jargon to help us better understand what's going on. A paradox is, put simply, a contradiction. A paradox is not something that's easily described, but really it is a contradiction that the author is pointing out within the text. Personification then is the application of human qualities to non-human things. And that's stylistic choices. Like I said, it breaks down into syntax, diction, and devices, because those are the things that are happening right at the